Frustrated by Norway's neutrality at the start of World War II, and its refusal to allow Allied troops to cross its territory to aid Finland during the Soviet invasion of 1939, France and Britain devised a plan called A4A, Major Military Operation, to occupy Norway. When Hitler learned of the plan, he decided to strike first and seize Norway before the Allies could act. The full force of the Kriegsmarine rushed to Norwegian ports, pretending to be friendly while demanding that the local navy in the strategic town of Narvik surrender all their warships. However, by hurrying to Narvik, the Kriegsmarine exposed itself, giving the Royal Navy a clear opportunity to strike the German fleet in a single decisive move. Europe was already in chaos. Germany had invaded Poland, prompting France and Britain to declare war on Hitler. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union took advantage of the disorder to attack Finland, leading to the brutal Winter War. In the middle of this turmoil was Norway, which chose to remain neutral and avoid direct involvement in the conflict, but this neutrality posed a major problem for the Allies. Without Norwegian cooperation, they couldn't help Finland, and Germany continued to receive most of its iron imports from Norwegian mines. Desperate to cut off these vital resources from reaching Germany, Britain and France crafted a secret plan. They would formally request permission to send troops through Norway to assist Finland. But their true objective was to seize control of Norwegian mines and strategic resources. Before the war, Germany had sourced much of its iron from French mines in Lorraine, but after invading Poland, it began relying heavily on Norwegian supplies. The Allies hoped that by disrupting these supply lines, they could deny Germany the materials it needed to sustain its war efforts. The Norwegians, however, were wary. They suspected the Allies' true intentions and refused to allow any foreign expeditionary forces to cross their land. Angered by this rejection, Britain and France publicly threatened to take the Norwegian mines by force. Hitler took these threats seriously, especially after the Altmark incident, in which the British showed they were willing to violate Norwegian neutrality to achieve their goals. As a result, he launched a preemptive strike. On April 9, 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. There were few warnings of the impending assault, and those that came were ignored by Norwegian authorities. On April 8, the German troopship SS Rio de Janeiro was sunk off Lillesand by the Polish submarine Orzel, operating under the Royal Navy. That same night, another German vessel was spotted by the Norwegian guard ship Pole 3, which fired at it but was quickly overwhelmed, resulting in the deaths of the crew and captain. The German invasion moved quickly from that point, overpowering Norwegian attempts to defend the country. The Norwegian Air Force initially deployed just 5 fighters against more than 80 German warplanes. The Germans executed the first successful paratrooper operation in military history, landing airborne troops at the Fornebu airport near Oslo and the Sola air station near Stavanger. Despite the overwhelming odds, the defenders at Fortress mounted a strong resistance. In the early hours of April 9th, they fired on the German cruiser Blücher. 2 aging German-made coastal guns unleashed a devastating barrage that ultimately sank the vessel, blocking the fjord and delaying the rest of the German fleet. The Kriegsmarine was stunned by this unexpected resistance. Unsure whether the damage came from the fortress or from mines in the area, they decided to postpone the rest of the naval invasion. This delay gave the Norwegian royal family, the government, and members of parliament enough time to escape. During their flight, they witnessed the battles of Midskagen and the bombings of Elverum and Nyberg. Despite these dangers, they managed to survive and later formed a government in exile in Britain. Meanwhile, Norwegian military officer and Nazi sympathizer Vidkun Quisling attempted to seize power by announcing a new pro-German government during a radio broadcast. Even as the invasion was underway, strategic locations such as Bergen, Stavanger, Egersund, Kristiansand, Arendal, Horten, and Trondheim were captured by the Germans in less than a day. Norwegian coastal defense ships, Norge and Eidsvold, tried to defend Narvik but were no match for the German Navy and were sunk shortly after the battle began. The German invasion had largely succeeded. with local defenses collapsing quickly. However, not everything went as planned. The journey to Narvik was long, and Germany had arranged for 3 fuel tankers to arrive in the port before the main force. Only one managed to dock safely. The other 2 were intercepted or destroyed by Norwegian forces. Frustrated by Norway's refusal to abandon its neutrality at the beginning of World War II, and its unwillingness to let Allied forces pass through to aid Finland during the Soviet invasion in 1939, France and Britain devised a plan known as R4. This was a military operation aimed at occupying Norway. Once Hitler discovered the plan, he resolved to act first, launching a swift campaign to seize Norway before the Allies could toad. The German Navy rushed toward key Norwegian ports, pretending to be allies while ordering the local navy in Narvik to surrender its warships. In doing so, the Germans exposed themselves to a counterattack, giving the British Royal Navy a prime opportunity to strike back and weaken the German fleet. Europe had already been thrown into turmoil. Germany's invasion of Poland had drawn declarations of war from France and Britain. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union exploited the situation by launching an attack on Finland, beginning what became the brutal Winter War. In the middle of this growing conflict stood Norway, which opted for neutrality in hopes of avoiding the bloodshed. However, this decision created a serious obstacle for the Allies. Without Norwegian cooperation, they had no way to support Finland, and Germany was continuing to import essential iron supplies from Norway's mines. Hoping to stop these resources from strengthening Germany's war efforts, Britain and France developed a plan to send forces into Finland through Norway. They intended to ask for permission, but their actual goal was to take control of Norway's strategic mines and resources. Before the outbreak of war, Germany received most of its iron from French mines in Lorraine, but after occupying Poland, it relied heavily on iron coming from Norway. Capturing these supply lines would mean cutting Germany off from vital materials. Norway, however, suspected the true aim of the plan and denied the Allies access to their territory. In response, Britain and France openly threatened to take the mines by force. Hitler took the warning seriously. The recent Altmark incident had proven that Britain was willing to violate Norwegian neutrality to pursue its interests. Fearing Allied interference, Hitler ordered a preemptive strike. On April 9, 1940, Germany launched its invasion of both Denmark and Norway. Warnings of the coming invasion were minimal and largely ignored. On April 8, the German troop transport SS Rio de Janeiro was sunk near Lillesand by a Polish submarine, or P. Orzel, operating under the Royal Navy. That same night, another German ship was spotted by the Norwegian guard vessel, Pole 3, which opened fire but was swiftly overwhelmed, resulting in the deaths of the crew and the captain. After that, events moved rapidly, and Germany's invasion force quickly overran Norwegian defenses. The Norwegian Air Force could only muster 5 fighter planes against more than 80 German aircraft. Germany also carried out the first successful airborne troop assault in history by landing paratroopers at Fornebu Airport near Oslo and at Sola Air Station near Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Norwegian forces at Oscarsborg Fortress put up a strong fight. In the early hours of April 9th, they targeted the leading German cruiser, Blucher, using two aging German-made coastal guns. The fortress inflicted heavy damage and ultimately sank the cruiser, blocking the narrow fjord and halting the rest of the fleet. The German Navy was caught off guard by the resistance and uncertain whether the attack had come from the fortress or mines in the water. This hesitation delayed their advance and gave the Norwegian royal family, government officials and parliamentarians time to escape. During their retreat, they witnessed the fighting at Midskagen and the bombings of Elverum and Nyberg. Nevertheless, they managed to survive and eventually established a government in exile in Britain. As the invasion unfolded, Norwegian army officer and Nazi supporter Vidkun Quisling used a radio broadcast to attempt a political takeover and declare a Nazi-aligned Norwegian government. Meanwhile, Germany quickly captured important ports and cities, including Bergen, Stavanger, Egersund, Kristiansand, Arendal, Horten, and Trondheim within less than 24 hours. Norwegian defense ships, Norge and Eidsvold, tried to resist at Narvik, but they were outmatched and were soon sunk. The German invasion of Norway was largely successful, with most local resistance collapsing quickly. However, not everything went according to plan. The trip to Narvik was long, and Germany had secretly arranged for 3 fuel tankers to enter the port ahead of the main fleet. Only one of them managed to dock safely. The other 2 were intercepted or destroyed by Norwegian forces before they could complete their mission. At the start of World War II, Norway chose to remain neutral, hoping to stay out of the conflict. This frustrated both Britain and France, especially when Norway refused to let Allied troops pass through its territory to help Finland during the Soviet invasion in 1939. In response, the Allies prepared a secret military plan called R4 to occupy Norway and secure its strategic resources. When Hitler learned about the plan, he decided to act first. He ordered a rapid German invasion to take control of Norway before the Allies could. The German Navy moved swiftly, arriving at key Norwegian ports under the pretense of friendship, but demanding surrender from local forces, especially in the important port of Narvik. This bold move left the German fleet exposed, and the British Royal Navy quickly recognized the opportunity to strike a serious blow against it. The situation in Europe had already spiraled into chaos. Germany's invasion of Poland had led Britain and France to declare war, while the Soviet Union launched its own attack on Finland. Starting the Winter War, Norway stood in the middle of this growing conflict, but chose not to take sides. This neutral stance was a major setback for the Allies. Without Norway's cooperation, they couldn't send aid to Finland. And Germany was able to import vital iron ore from Norwegian mines, which was essential for its war industry. Britain and France wanted to cut off this supply chain. Their plan was to request permission to send an expeditionary force through Norway to help Finland. But their real goal was to take over the iron mines and control Norwegian resources. Before the war, Germany got much of its iron from France, but after the invasion of Poland, Norway became its main supplier. If the Allies could gain control of the supply route, they could cripple Germany's access to critical materials. Norway, suspicious of Allied intentions, refused their request. In frustration, Britain and France began publicly threatening to take the mines by force. Hitler, alarmed by these threats, and by Britain's willingness to violate Norwegian neutrality during the recent Altmark incident, decided to strike first. On April 9, 1940, German forces invaded both Denmark and Norway in a coordinated assault. There were only vague warnings before the invasion, and Norwegian authorities failed to act on them. On April 8, a German transport ship, the SS Rio de Janeiro, was sunk near Lillesand by the Polish submarine Orepi Orzel. Later that night, another German vessel was spotted by the Norwegian patrol boat Pole 3. The Norwegians opened fire, but the German response was overwhelming, resulting in the deaths of the Pole III's crew. From that point, German forces moved quickly and encountered little organized resistance. The Norwegian Air Force was vastly outnumbered. With only 5 fighters available to oppose more than 80 German planes, Germany carried out the first successful airborne assault in military history by landing troops at Fornebu Airport and the Sola Air Station. Despite being outmatched, the defenders at Oscarsborg Fortress put up a determined fight. In the early hours of April 9th, they opened fire on the German cruiser. The fortress's old coastal guns hit the ship hard, and it eventually sank, blocking the narrow fjord and delaying the rest of the German fleet. The Germans were shaken by the resistance and unsure whether they were under attack from artillery or mines. As a result, they decided to pause their naval advance. This gave the Norwegian royal family, the cabinet, and members of parliament enough time to escape. During their retreat, they passed through towns under attack, including Elverum and Nybergsand. They eventually made it to safety and formed a government in exile in Britain. At the same time, a pro-Nazi Norwegian officer, Vidkun Quisling, tried to seize control of the government by broadcasting a speech announcing a new regime aligned with Germany. As the German invasion spread, key locations such as Bergen, Stavanger, Egersund, Kristiansand, Arendal, Horten, and Trondheim were captured within a single day. Norwegian coastal defense ships, Norge and Eidsvold, tried to defend Narvik, but were quickly destroyed by the superior German fleet. Though the invasion was largely successful for Germany, not everything went according to their plans. The journey to Narvik was long, and Germany had arranged for 3 fuel tankers to enter the port ahead of the main naval force. Only one of these ships managed to reach its destination. The other 2 were intercepted or destroyed by Norwegian forces before they could dock, creating logistical problems for the German Navy. By the time Germany had taken control of the port at Narvik, its fleet of destroyers was nearly out of fuel and heavily depleted. With only 1 tanker available, refueling was a slow and difficult process. During the initial German assault, the British Royal Navy made several attempts to intercept the Kriegsmarine, but these efforts were unsuccessful. However, Commodore Bernard Warburton-Lee, commander of the British 2nd Destroyer Flotilla, had learned the location of the German warships and believed they were likely low on fuel. He decided to take advantage of the situation and strike a surprise blow to destroy the German fleet at Narvik. Warburton-Lee had 5 H-class destroyers at his command: HMS Hardy, Hotspur, Havoc, Hunter, and Hostile. Norwegian pilots had reported that 6 German destroyers were present in the port, and he hoped that the surprise attack would help balance the odds. On the morning of April 10th, the flotilla approached Narvik under cover of a heavy snowstorm. Emerging from the mist, the British ships launched a sudden assault on 2 German destroyers that were being refueled by the lone tanker Jan Wellem. The first naval battle of Narvik was about to begin. The German destroyers, Hermann Kuhn and Hans Luttmann, anchored near the tanker, were caught off guard by the incoming British fire. Both ships were unprepared for combat and risked being sunk without immediate support. Fortunately for the German side, a larger group of their vessels was just leaving Narvik harbor. The British quickly shifted their focus and attempted to ambush the arriving ships. The German destroyers were not yet in formation for battle, giving the British a temporary advantage. In a swift and coordinated attack, the British destroyers managed to sink Wilhelm Heidkamp and Anton Schmidt, severely damaged Diether von Roda, and lightly hit the 2 refueling destroyers. Meanwhile, German soldiers stationed on shore began firing at the British ships, and the British returned fire from their decks. As the land-based resistance increased, the British ships were forced to withdraw because they lacked ground troops to neutralize the enemy on shore. Before leaving, HMS Hostile launched torpedoes at the merchant ships in the harbor, destroying 11 vessels, 6 German, 1 British, 2 Swedish, and 2 Norwegian. British reports indicated that 5 out of the 6 German destroyers in the area had been disabled. However, Warburton-Lee had been given incorrect information. There were actually 10 German destroyers in Narvik, not 6. As the British flotilla began its withdrawal, it was suddenly ambushed by 3 more German destroyers, Wolfgang Zenk, Erich Kolner, and Erich Jasm, merging from the Herjungsfjord, a northern branch of Narvik. These were soon joined by 2 more destroyers, Georg Thiel and Bernd von Arnim, arriving from the Belangen Bay area. Caught off guard and running low on ammunition. The British ships were now facing 5 fully armed German destroyers. The situation became desperate. While the British had been engaged with the initial wave of German ships, the new arrivals flanked them. Despite being surrounded, Warburton-Lee refused to surrender and fought back fiercely. A brutal naval battle followed, but the encirclement was overwhelming. Warburton-Lee's flagship suffered critical damage, and he was killed in action. His crew, unable to continue fighting, deliberately ran the damaged ship aground to prevent it from sinking. With the flagship lost, the morale and effectiveness of the flotilla collapsed. HMS Hunter was struck by German torpedoes and sank within minutes. HMS Hotspur was also hit, severely reducing its combat capability. Recognizing that victory was impossible, the surviving British ships withdrew from the battle. The 5 German destroyers, though damaged and low on fuel, chose not to pursue the retreating British. Even in defeat, the British second destroyer flotilla had inflicted significant losses on the German Navy. Warburton-Lee's leadership and courage were recognized. After his death, with the awarding of the Victoria Cross, the Germans would not enjoy their success for long, as the Royal Navy soon dispatched the battleship HMS Warspite, along with 9 additional destroyers. Within days, they would return to Narvik to complete the mission Warburton-Lee had begun. When Germany finally secured the port of Narvik, its fleet of destroyers was in a weakened state. The ships were running low on fuel, and with only 1 tanker available, the refueling process was slow and complicated. Earlier British efforts to intercept the German Navy had failed, but Commodore Bernard Warburton-Lee, commanding the British second destroyer flotilla, now knew where the German ships were positioned. Even more importantly, he suspected they were nearly out of fuel. With this knowledge, he decided to launch a bold surprise attack to cripple the German fleet while it was vulnerable. Warburton-Lee had 5 H-class destroyers under his command: HMS Hardy, Hotspur, Havoc, Hunter, and Hostile. Norwegian pilots had informed him that 6 German destroyers were present in Narvik. Relying on the element of surprise, he hoped his force could even the odds. In the early hours of April 10th, hidden by a thick snowstorm, the flotilla reached Narvik as they emerged from the mist. The British ships immediately targeted to German destroyers that were being refueled by the tanker Jan Wellem. The German destroyers Hermann Kuhn and Hans Ludemann were anchored beside the tanker when they were suddenly attacked. They were not prepared for combat, and were in danger of being sunk unless help arrived. As it happened, more German destroyers were leaving Narvik port at that very moment. The British turned their fire on these incoming vessels, catching them off guard before they could form a proper battle formation. The British destroyers launched a coordinated assault. Within minutes, they had sunk Wilhelm Heidkamp and Anton Schmidt, seriously damaged Diether von Roeder, and inflicted light damage on the 2 destroyers that were refueling. Meanwhile, German troops stationed on land began firing at the British ships, which responded with their own fire from the decks. As resistance from the shore increased, and without any troops of their own to engage the Germans on land, the British ships were forced to pull back. Before retreating, HMS Hostile launched torpedoes at the harbour, destroying 11 merchant ships, 6 German, 1 British, 2 Swedish, and 2 Norwegian. British intelligence initially believed that 5 out of the 6 German destroyers in the area had been neutralized, but Warburton-Lee had been misinformed. In reality, 10 German destroyers were stationed at Narvik. As the British ships began to leave the harbour, they were suddenly attacked by 3 German destroyers. Wolfgang Zenker, Erich Kolner, and Erich Gstaad came speeding out of Herjangstad, a northern branch of the harbour. These ships were quickly joined by Georg Thiel and Bernd von Arnim, approaching from Belangen Bay. The British, low on ammunition and caught off guard, were suddenly facing 5 fully armed German destroyers. The second flotilla had already been engaged with earlier German ships, and now they were being attacked from the flank. Warburton-Lee chose to continue fighting, determined not to give the enemy an easy victory. A fierce naval battle followed, but the German trap proved too strong. Warburton-Lee's ship was badly hit, and he was killed in the fighting. His crew, unable to save the vessel, ran it aground to avoid total destruction. With their commander gone and 1 ship beached, British morale fell sharply. HMS Hunter was struck by German torpedoes and sank within minutes. HMS Hotspur was also damaged by torpedoes, severely limiting its ability to continue the fight. With no realistic chance of winning, the remaining British ships were forced to retreat. The German destroyers, though damaged and nearly out of fuel, did not pursue the fleeing British vessels. Although the second flotilla had been driven back, it dealt significant damage to the German Navy. Warburton-Lee's leadership and bravery were recognized with a posthumous award of the Victoria Cross. The German forces, however, would not have long to rest. The Royal Navy soon dispatched the battleship HMS Warspite and 9 destroyers to return to Narvik and finish the job that Warburton-Lee had begun.